Okay. All right. So, thank you so much for coming. We started this Wasatch Speaker Series a couple months ago in commemoration of America 250. So this is all leading up to July 4th, and as you leave, please pick up a little booklet, United States Constitution, and on the other side, Declaration of Independence. And with America 250, we wanted to celebrate our local history as well and learn more about that, while it ties into national and global themes. So we had public schools, we had mining here and how that connected to the greater nation and with mining movements and things like that. Tonight we're doing early settlers. We also, next month, will be hosting Dwayne Wheatley and Easton Powell. Thank you for coming tonight. But that is, you have a flyer right here, June 10th at 6 p.m. And we're going to learn more about the Declaration of Independence and also how that ties into Wasatch County. We have great educators. Dwayne used to work at the high school, now retired, and then also Easton Powell, he is a history teacher as well. So we're really excited to have them talking about the Declaration and how that ties into our community, past, present, and then future as well. And so please come with this booklet, read it beforehand and come and we're going to talk about it as well a little bit after the presentation. July, we also have invited Brent Kelly to speak about the history of the rodeo here in Wasatch County and Fair Days, and that's going to start off Fair Days, so that's July 27th. Look forward to that. And then we're programming all through fall and into winter as well, so we're going to continue this on through 2027. And so look forward to other themes that we're going to focus on, local history and regional as well. It's really fun because I get to read all the newspaper articles and think about, we're going to have to do this thing and we're going to have to bring this person in. So it's really, really fun. If you know of anyone, let me know. My office is upstairs and I'd love to learn more about what kind of themes you want to hear from as well. All right, so I love this quote from the Utah Historical Society. History is not just a collection of dates and events. It is a living tapestry woven by the choices and actions of individuals who came before us, shaping the world we inhabit today. And so that is why we're focusing on early settlers of the Heber Valley. John's going to touch on who was here before, and I really hope to invite a tribal member here in the future to speak about who was here before the early settlers as well. So stay tuned for that also. But we are very excited to have John Besendorfer and Alice Hicken. They have are longtime residents of the valley, and then also have ancestors who were here, the first ones here. They'll talk more about that. But also just such amazing stories, and some of them you might know as well. So afterwards, after their presentation, we'd love to have questions and share stories as well. So thank you for coming, and please put your hands together to welcome Alice and John. We have a debate. Who's going to speak first? Okay. Well, I spoke first. Oh, the icebreaker. All right. And I'm the tech person too. So.
I'm ready. Well, thank you for being here this evening, and I am looking forward to it, kind of. Anyway, we're celebrating, like Kate mentioned here, the 250th anniversary of our country. And it just so happens that 250 years ago was something happened that related to this valley. And that was when Escalante and Dominguez, they were Spanish Catholic friars in Santa Fe, which is now New Mexico, but it wasn't back then. And they started out on a journey. And they wanted to go to Monterey, California. They had one big hurdle, however, in that process, and that was the Grand Canyon. But anyway, when they didn't ever make the full trip to Monterey and back, that they had to turn around and come back. And in that process, they traveled through Strawberry Valley. And then they came down a canyon, Diamond Fork Canyon, which led into Spanish Fork Canyon. And they followed Spanish Fork Canyon down to the end of the canyon, and right there now at the bottom of Spanish Fork Canyon, there's a big monument there. It's been there for years. It celebrates Escalante and Dominguez. And they went on clear to Utah Lake, and they mingled with the Indians there. They were kind of a fish-eating group of Indians. Well, then 50 years went by without anything happening here in the valley. And then a man by the name of Etnie Prevost, and he was a trapper, and he had like 20 trappers that he was over. And they got in a little skirmish with the Indians, and it didn't turn out very well for Etnie Prevost. And somewhere along the Provo River, Etnie Prevost and his men met with a group of Indians, and they were going to smoke the peace pipe. And in the process of doing that, the Chief Gotcho was his name, Mad Gotcho, they called him. And he says, there's iron among us, and we can't smoke the peace pipe until you lay the iron aside. The iron, of course, was the guns and whatever, weapons, knives, and so forth. And so Etnie Prevost and his trappers, which was close to 20 or even a few more, they laid them aside, and they started smoking the peace pipe, and all of a sudden, Mad Gotcho gave a command, and all of the Indians stood up and went to war with the trappers. And Etnie Prevost lost most of his trappers, over a dozen, 17 in fact, were killed. And only 4 of them survived, and Etnie Prevost was one of the ones that survived. And so that was probably enough for him. And so he left at that time and went back to St. Louis, Missouri. And like I mentioned, he was a French Canadian. Well, he didn't know it, but later on, probably about the time he passed away, Provo City, Provo River, Provo Valley, Provo Canyon, all of those were named after him, Etnie Prevost. Prevost, you take the T off the end, and that's Provo. And so that came about, and this was called Provo Valley there for many years. And sometimes they called it the Upper Provo River Valley, so that was 2 names that it had at that time. And here we see a picture of that Vernon Murdoch, who was a wonderful artist and historian here in the valley for many years. He did so much good for the valley. And you see the picture there, he's looking, Vernon painted that picture as he saw it, and I would guess that that was on the east side of the valley. You see the Indians there, and Timpanogos in the background. And the Indians at one time called it High Mountain Valley. And then the next name that they called it was Timpanogos Valley. And so the valley, as you can see, has had many different names over time. And then later that the Provo River and was named, well, that's how it's got its name, of course. Okay. Now, here you see some Indian pictographs, and these were found here in the valley. These were over in the Deer Creek Mountains. I've been to them many times. They're under a ledge up there. They've been preserved there all of my lifetime, and thank goodness they have. They were away from the sun and the storms and the weather, and so they've been preserved. They're under a big ledge up there. I haven't been back to them for a few years, and now I don't think I can get back to them. This is a picture of Charleston before Deer Creek Reservoir. In 1941, Deer Creek Reservoir, the dam was built, and it was dedicated at that time. But this is Charleston in the early days. When the Deer Creek Reservoir went in, that took out about half of the area of Charleston and half of the population. And I remember back when the dam was being built, like that's been 85 years ago, and I was just a youngster at the time. But I remembered as I started school at Charleston Elementary School, it normally would have been a pretty big class, but half of the people at Charleston were gone. So when I started first grade in Charleston Elementary School, there were 5 students in the first grade. There was one other boy besides myself and 3 girls. And that's what happened because of the people that left Charleston. Some of them relocated here in the valley, and some moved completely out of the valley. And then, let's see here, maybe at this time, concerning the Indians, you know, a lot of relics have been found here in the valley that relate to the Indians. And even Indian matatas, that's the grinding stones. People have been plowing, and all of a sudden they pick up some of those artifacts like that. And actually, I have a rusty old sword that was almost rusted away, but it was found north of Heber, and it was 5 feet down in the ground, and a tobacco dug it up. And when it rolled out on top of the ground, that ancient sword, and almost rotted away, and I thought to myself, well, how did it get there? How did it get here in this valley? And 5 feet deep. But I have that sword. I have it in my museum. I wish it could talk and tell me its history. Okay.
Okay, looks like we have some more chairs over here if you want to sit. And then there's one right over this way in the
Can
front.
we turn off the lights so we can see the screen better?
Thanks, Britt. I appreciate it.
Wrong direction.
Okay. That helped?
There we go.
Okay.
I'm not going to get any more chairs unless people occupy those.
She said,
Chairs. Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
okay. Here we have William Madison Wall, and he's been, you see, early in the valley here, some of the very earliest people were ranchers, even before there was a road in Provo Canyon. So they drove their livestock up Provo Canyon, and they raised those cattle in the area that's now under Deer Creek Reservoir. They were ranches there, but they didn't have homes. So they'd move their cattle back and forth there to that. And William Madison Wall was one of those that did that. And this here is George Washington Bean. He actually married one of William Madison Wall's daughter, Mary Jane Wall. And they have such a history behind those early people that came into the valley. For example, the first one there, William Madison Wall, he was on a mission in Australia. Brigham Young called him back because that's when Johnston's army was starting to come into the valley, and of course that was quite a siege, 2,500 men, and they got detained in Fort Bridger, Wyoming for a year and held there, so it stopped him for a while from coming into the valley. But when he got back from his mission, on the way home, he stopped in California, and I can't remember what the name of the town was, but there was a mob there that threatened him. They had ropes, they were going to lynch him, and he was in there, he could hear them yelling and that, and finally, knowing that, he took his bed apart, and there was a big wooden piece of wood in his bed, and he confronted the mob right at the front door. And he said to them, he said, I have never killed a man in my life, and I don't want to kill a man in my life, but I'm going to kill the first 2 or 3 of you that attacked me. And he says, I've never, and I don't want to kill an innocent person. So if you are innocent, please step back so I don't kill you. Well, you know what happened? They all stepped back. And that was a story that he told. He had some close calls too. And he was a marshal of Provo and in a city. And at one time, a bullet went right through his cap, nicked the top of his head. And he had some close calls, as you can see. But and later on, he moved his stock up into what is Wallsburg now. They called it Little Warm Valley, the Indians, and then later on it was called Round Valley. But and then after William Madison Wall left there, then it was named Wallsburg. That's how Wallsburg got its name. Now this right here, this picture is George Washington Bean, and there's so many stories about these early people that came into the valley, but he was one of the early ones in the old Provo fort near the Provo River where it goes into Utah Lake, and he was, they had a cannon there, and it was kind of mounted up high. They shot the cannon off, they were reloading it, and it was still hot, and it malfunctioned and shot again, and he lost his hand and part of his arm during that. And they said he collected up the little pieces of bone from that and put in a bottle. And he was that way. He wanted to have a blessing, and it was a week later that Brigham Young came and blessed him. But he came and was one of those ranchers that'd be under Deer Creek Reservoir. And his son was Willard Bean, and there's been a movie made about him, the Mormon Preacher or something like that. Have any of you seen that? Yeah, sounds like quite a few. Only the Preaching Fighter, something like that. It's the name of it. And yeah, really excellent thing. Okay, now this is William Meeks here, another one of those early ranchers. And he's actually the person that prepared the group that later on came into the valley. And all winter long, he was making them prepare, and then they finally came up through the valley, and Alice is going to tell the story about that. Okay. This is Aaron Daniels, and Aaron Daniels stayed in the valley here, and Daniels Canyon and Daniels Creek was named after him. And he lived in a little dugout or wickiup right where Daniels Creek goes into the Provo River. And he stayed there in the winter of 1858. And that was before there was a road in Provo Canyon. And, okay, we can go on here. He was divorced from his first wife, but his second wife was a Shoshone Indian. And she was a survivor of the Bear River Massacre, which was in Preston, Idaho. And there at that massacre, the Shoshone Indians were in a little place there, a hollow, several hundred of them, and the U.S. cavalry attacked them, and over 200 or 300 of those Indians, Shoshones, were killed. And she was a survivor of that group. And she later on married Aaron Daniels, who was an early person here in the valley. And this is, what's her name here? Okay, this is his wife, Rose Daniels. And later on, she ended up living out at Fort Duchesne and on the Ute Reservation. And she was over 100 and I think 103 years old when she passed away. And people there in Fort Duchesne's, some of them even now are descendants of her and speak about her. In fact, I met one of them 2 weeks ago when they did the monument at the Heber Cemetery that knew of her descendants there. And one thing in the writings about them, it said that Aaron and her were buried in the Daniels Cemetery. And I hunted for years trying to find out where the Daniels Cemetery was. Nobody could tell me where it was. And I hunted, I couldn't find anything. Well, one day there were 2 carloads of people pulled into my place, and I invited them into my home, and they were the Daniels family way down the line. 3 of them were brothers, and 1 was a sister, and their spouses. And so in my living room, I asked them, I said, "Where is the Daniels Cemetery?" And they said, "We know." I said, "Well, tell me, where is it?" And so they told the story. They said they went out to the Ute Reservation, and they were hunting for it and trying to find it. And they hunted all day long and couldn't find it. And they finally, on one of those little dirt roads, they came to a gate. They stopped, and they thought, well, guess we're through for the day. And one of them said, "Let's pray." And so they did. And when they finished their prayer, a pickup truck pulled up right by the side of them with an Indian driving it. And he got out, and he was suspicious of them, wondered what they were doing. And they said, "We're hunting for the Daniels Cemetery." And he said, "Well, follow me." And they followed him. He opened up the gate, and they continued and went on for maybe a few miles. And they came to the cemetery that you can see there. And right at the top of it, it says, Daniels Cemetery. And so now we know where the Daniels Cemetery is. And it says there, and the headstone's been put there, it says Aaron and Rose Daniels. So now we know. This is a picture of the Civilian Conservation Corps. They were the ones that cleared the ground when Deer Creek Reservoir, the dam was built. And all of the homes and the fences and the barns and sheds and trees and everything like that had to be cleared out before the water started backing up for Deer Creek Reservoir. And most people didn't know that the CCC's, Civilian Conservation Corps, had a big camp right here in Heber off of Main Street. It would be about 7th South and a couple of blocks west. And it had several hundred men in it. And this is a picture over here of that. And they had about 7 places where they stayed in there. It was a big place. And those were here in the 1930s. And during Roosevelt, Delano Roosevelt's term, he made it possible for them, these to be organized. And they were all over the United States. This group here came from Missouri, and they settled here in the valley. And after they were through, about at least 30 of them stayed here in the valley and married people here in the valley and became prominent citizens here in the valley. And so that was CCCs. This is you see the sheep in Provo Canyon. That's a little bit different kind of a road. All of the big sheep herds went down Provo Canyon at that time to get to the range out on the desert. So they drive them down the canyon, and they would take up the whole road. A lot of these herds had thousands of sheep in them. Now, if you were in a car going down that road and you were trying to get through that sheep herd, you would have a hard time if they were going the same direction. But if you were coming back up the canyon, then you could slowly make your way through them. Okay, this is a monument that's in Charleston at on the town park. And on the plaque there, that tells about George and Sophia Noakes as they came into the valley. And some of the things they did, well, they had a cabin and a spring, a nice big spring, was called Noakes Springs. And that's under Deer Creek Reservoir, but it provided a lot of water. But they had remarkable stories that were told about them as they came across the plains. In fact, 2 stories, but I won't tell them, but they were miracles that happened. And Sophia, the wife, always loved to tell about them. They were both buried in the Charleston Cemetery. That's their headstone, George and Sophia Noakes. And a lot of places here in the valley are named after the Noakeses. They had a big posterity. There's a Noakes Hollow near Daniels Canyon. This is John M. Ritchie. And he was the first mayor of Charleston. And that was right at the turn of the century when Charleston became an incorporated town. In fact, it was the last week in the 1800s, and the first week in the 1900s is when he became the mayor. But that took a week before when Charleston was incorporated. And then he was the 3rd bishop of the Charleston ward, and he was bishop for 33 years of the Charleston ward. Okay, now this is Jim Ritchie right back here knows about this story right here because this is his grandpa, I believe, right? Jimmy Ritchie. Jimmy Ritchie became later on the mayor of Charleston, and he was the mayor of Charleston for 49 and a half years. And it was time for an election to take place, and he decided he didn't want to run again. And the people of Charleston said, "You got to run again." And he says, "Why?" And they said, "So you can say that you've been mayor for over 50 years. Well, he finally said, "Well, I think 49 and a half years is good enough. I don't think I'll run again." And so he didn't. And on that, by the way, there in that picture, he's been on a bear hunt, and there's a bear there laying on his lap. He's the closest guy to us. What's that? I don't know what building that is. It's probably in Heber. Yeah. You tell me when this is. Okay, at one time, the United States Cavalry was leaving Charleston. This is a picture. This is a picture of the cavalry leaving Charleston on a dirt road, and it's kicking up some dust, and that's why it's kind of a dusty picture there too. But they're all on horses, and they're pulling two cannons with horses, teams. And so why they were going through Charleston, where they were going, or where they came from, I don't know. I definitely know that that's on the road between Charleston and Midway. This is a Charleston school bus. One of the early ones here in the district. And the person sitting up on the hood of the school bus is Jim Casper. He was the early bus driver there in Charleston. So how's that for a Wasatch County School District bus? And I was on, I think, that bus at one time. Jim was my uncle, lived only a block away from me, so I knew him well. But one time I rode in that bus, and the seats, instead of going like this, went like this down the sides. And so, of course, no seat belts. I guess they still don't have seat belts. But when you went around the corner, if it was going a little bit too fast, you'd land out in the aisle. And it was made out of wood. And it would just rattle like crazy. You couldn't hear yourself think it was rattling so bad. This is the Charleston schoolhouse. And that's where I went to elementary school, 6 years. In 1992, a big heavy snow came here in the valley, and then it rained on it, and it caved the roof in. And when the roof caved in, it pushed out the walls, and so it had to be torn down and was never rebuilt. But Charleston now has a new, and it was used for a town hall for quite a few years. Charleston now has a new town hall. This was the church house that I went to in Charleston, and in 1949, it burnt down. And I was in the schoolhouse the day that it burnt down. I was just going on 12 years old, and our principal and school teacher let us stand by the window. In fact, the students saw that burning that morning before school started. We stood there and watched the smoke come up, and then we saw the fire engines coming, and we felt bad. And as we were standing there at the window, and our teacher, Mr. Clarence Pace, he let us stand there and watch through the window and watch it burning down. And I'm glad that he did. And as we were watching, some of the girls started crying when they saw this, and it made some of the boys cry too. This is another picture of this church house there. So my church house burnt down, my schoolhouse caved in, my high school up on Main Street was torn down, so nothing much left of me. Okay. This was John, am I through? Okay, two more. Okay, this is John Watkins. He was the first presiding elder of the Charleston branch, and he lived in Midway. He was a survivor of the William Martin Hancock companies, and he had so many things that he did, but he traveled from Midway to Charleston every Sunday. When he got to the Provo River, there weren't any bridges. He had a little mule team and a carriage behind it, and so he would always have to cross the river to get to Charleston. But when the river was high, he couldn't cross the Provo River. But he had another way of getting to Charleston, and he would drive his donkeys, I guess it was, not mules, donkeys up Soldier Hollow, over the top of the hill there into Deckers, back down to the Provo River, and follow it down to what they called the Wallsburg Switch. And when he got there, there was a bridge there, and then he would cross the bridge and then come back up to Charleston. Going to church for him was an all-day thing, getting there and getting back. Corey Hanks, he grew up in Charleston. He lost his eyes and his hands in a mining accident on Mount Nebo, up a canyon there, and later on, well, he wasn't supposed to survive after that because he was in an isolated place, but in spite of that, he became a lecturer and went across the United States. He graduated from university, 2 years at Harvard, and graduated from Stanford University. And he started lecturing, and through his lectures, he made $10,000, which he paid for his college education. And he delivered over 6,000 lectures across the United States, traveled across the United States 50 different times, in Canada and Mexico 10 times, and never with anybody accompanying him. He wrote 2 books, Men of the Rockies and Footprints in Time, and that. And so he lived a remarkable life, and finally he passed away living here in Heber. A lot of big stories that could be told about him.
Thank you, John. We'll take this time and we'll hear from Alice as well, and then after we'll have time for questions as well.
I didn't get choked with this either.
Thank you, John. I love hearing about the settling of Heber and Heber history. I'm going to talk today about John Crook. He was my great-grandfather. Now, when someone dies, they say they lived from, like he lived from 1831 to 1928 and 21, and there's a dash between. What's in the dash? His life is in a dash. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the dash between the time he was born and died. I can go ahead. John Crook was born in England, and we need to appreciate him because he kept a very good journal of the history of Heber City and the Heber Valley. And, okay, he was an excellent journal keeper, and I appreciate him. Let me quickly tell you about him. He was born in 1831 in Lancashire, England. He joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and left England. But before he did, his wife had died, so he brought his son John and a daughter across the ocean. Then they crossed the plains to Utah. No, before that, okay. When he got to Council Bluffs, they waited and waited for a chance to come to Utah. His father, Dan Crook, was not he was never on the list to come to Utah. And he was denied 2 times when they started to cross, and he was so brokenhearted that he died. So here comes John Crook all by himself. So they were in, before he got to Utah, it was 9 or 8 years before he actually arrived in Utah. This is what he says in his journal when he rolled into the Salt Lake Valley. He said, the road passed over what is termed a hog's back, cut through a hill. And then you had a full view of Salt Lake City and Valley. Now see, this is in 1856. There was the blue water of the Salt Lake in the far west, and the beautiful settlements in the foreground, enchanting to the eye. There was the scene before us that we had longed to look for. So he was so happy to get here. He married one of the girls that he came across the plains with. Her name was Mary Giles. And they lived in a wagon, slept there all winter. He had been worked in a mine or a factory in England, and it said he was weaving tapes. And so when he came to Salt Lake Valley, he didn't know anything about plowing or farming at all, but he learned to plow and harvest wheat. And then Johnston's army came to Utah in 1857, and he went to Echo Canyon and to help defend the valley and Salt Lake Valley. And while they were there, Brigham Young proposed that they build a road through Provo Canyon to Provo Valley. Am I correct? So the rough road was made. Can you see that? And there were meetings held in Provo about settling what they call the Upper Provo Valley. So on April 30th, 1859, they started down this little road that had been carved out of the canyon. There were 11 families who left their families behind in Provo Valley and came up this little road to the Heber Valley. And remember, this was the 30th of April. How long ago was 30th of April for us? 2 weeks ago? He said winter was hard on the road and they encountered several snowslides. Okay, you can do the next one. Making the journey hazardous and exhausting. So in John Crook's journal, he said on April 30th, we camped at a snowslide in Provo Canyon that night. They took their wagons apart and pulled them up some way and put them back together and came back into the Heber Valley. And when they got there, as John has talked about, there were people, not several, but a few people already here plowing. And while they were here, they found William Davies and Robert Broadhead plowing. They made their way to London Springs, which is north of Heber, and they lived, this is Vernon Murlock's drawings too, they lived in wickiups of willows and grass, large enough to shelter 30 men. That's quite a covering, isn't it? And they began plowing and planting, and they made log cabins with dirt roofs and mud packed between the logs. Is that the next one? Oh, okay. Anyway, these men, can you go to the next one? They made their log cabins. And then they returned to Provo, where families greeted them with, when are we going to go to Heber, or to Upper Provo Valley. And 18 families chose to stay the winter. This is the cabin, Vernon's the grind. Here is a picture of the cabins that were built in what they called the fort to protect them from the think what it would have been like to spend, if they were going to spend the winter, what it would have been like. Keeping warm, preparing food, keeping clean, having light, but they did it. Now, the first baby born in Heber Valley was William Davidson and his wife. And they named the baby Timpanogos. How would you like that name? Now, the second baby born in the valley was born to John and Mary Crook. And her name was Sarah. She was born November 28, 1859, in their little cabin. Now, the cabin, we figure, was about, I wrote it down somewhere, about 12 by 14 feet. Now, I bet most of your bedrooms are about that size. Now, how would you like to live in there with a stove of some kind, and a bed, and a new baby, and a toddler? That would have been quite challenging. Anyway, that first winter, the snow was still deep, and so they gathered at the home of one of the Thomas Rasbin, and they prayed and asked the Lord to help spring to come to the valley. Well, when they left the meeting, water was dripping from the roof, and so spring was born in Heber Valley for them. Okay, let's see. Okay. So people came, the town grew, early log cabins were built hastily to provide housing, but only served until more permanent structures could be made. The permanent housing was made from brick and red sandstone found east of Heber. Now, John Crook, that we're talking about, and his brother owned the sandstone quarry east of Heber, providing stone for many homes in the valley. Now the next picture, there's him sitting on it. Okay, yeah, maybe I missed it. Okay, I didn't get that in. Maybe it's at the end. Okay, we'll go back. So after people started building nice homes and they moved out of the fort, let's fast forward to about 1950. A family, the Whittaker family, moved into the valley and they started developing the homestead. And they were looking for an old cabin to add to their homestead look. Now, the Crook cabin, the original Crook cabin that had been replaced by a brick house, was moved over to the homestead. They wanted to add it to their look. And, there. No, it's okay. I don't know where we are now. Okay, there it is at the homestead. That's what the homestead, they dragged it over. In fact, this is how they dragged it over. How many of you remember Irv Anderson? What was his? Okay, who was his wife? His wife taught? Florence, okay. Anyway, the Whittakers hired Irv Anderson to move it to the homestead. This was done by jacking it up and placing 2 logs longitudinally beneath it and letting the cabin back down on the logs. The logs were planked together and chained to Bishop Anderson's old reel truck. It was then skidded on the logs to the homestead in the middle of the night to avoid traffic problems. So this is a picture of the cabin as it was at the homestead. It was used as a tack shed or a potting shed for garden tools. Now, in 2003, you remember Dr. Green? He was really a wonderful historian in the valley. He told me that he had letters that he had gathered about this cabin at the homestead, where it came from and who it was. So he asked me to take the letters to the homestead and so that they could document where this cabin came from. And they filed the letters. And they wrote a brief description and had a little plaque on the cabin there. And I was urged several times by my husband, John Robert, to talk to the homestead people and see if the cabin could be returned to Heber. I was told they had no intention of it leaving. Well, in August of 2024, the homestead pushed over the Crook cabin as they were remodeling their homestead look. I met with the manager, and he didn't know anything at all about the old cabin. I reminded him, although I wasn't reminded, I told him, I said, you have all the papers on this cabin saying where it came from. Well, my sons brought the logs to the son's property. This is how it looked when I found it. In Lake Creek. And they moved, is there another one? They're moving it. And so I tried to think, where should the Crook cabin stand? Well, I went to the North School, where the school district office is, the school district office is now. And I went to the school board, and my husband was the school board administrator for almost 30 years, and I'd never been to a school board meeting. But I went to a school board meeting. And this is what I told, was my presentation. I says, this cabin is a Heber cabin. And the cabin was in the fort where this cabin was built to hold. And there was a school in this fort. Now, the North School is the only original school building standing in our valley today. I know Wallsburg stands, but in our valley, the only original school building that stands today is the North School. And it's made out of sandstone. Now, I think it is fitting that the John Crook cabin be placed near the Peace Treaty Monument honoring Chief Tabby and Joseph Stacy Murdoch. The treaty was signed in the Murdoch home across the street from the school, made with sandstone. So they accepted my proposal, and they're going to place this cabin near the school board office, we call it the North Schools. Now, many buildings in Heber are made from sandstone quarry. The tabernacle, the jail, the courthouse, the Murdoch home, the amusement hall, and many foundations. As you look around, some of the older houses have sandstone foundation. Now, Now, under the direction of Ron Carlisle, a great-great-grandson of John Mary Crook, I see you're here. Raise your hand. The cabin is being reconstructed. Did we have a picture of that? Yeah. Yeah, here. Okay. Can you see how it is? This is being reconstructed. Some of the logs have had to be replaced. A roof will have to be made, a door and one window. And it is interesting that there were gun slits made in the logs in case they were attacked by the Indians. Now, the CAPS program at the school took this on as a project to see if they could piece all these logs together so that they could reconstruct the cabin. And this is their drawings that they made. I think they did a really good job. We've had to replace some of the logs, but this was their project, and we appreciate them. I'm going to end by saying, the John Crook cabin is one of a few cabins from the fort existing. Now, I think there are a few others, but this is one cabin that we know existed in the fort. And this, when this gets placed on the North School, or I call it the North School blog, it will give honor to all who helped settle this beautiful Heber Valley. The CAPS program did this. They listed all the logs and the numbers, and anyway, this is what they did.
Alice, so when you say the North School, is that the school district office?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, see, I'm old-fashioned.
Okay.
I can't get it in my mind.
Okay, I just wondered if I was thinking of the same, right?
Oh, yes.
We have time for some questions, if anyone has any questions.
Where was the location of the fort, the old Fort Heber?
Where was the location of the old
Okay.
Fort Heber?
Well, I figured it out. Well, it's, it's down by where the Heber, as you come into town, you know where the bowling alley is? And I wrote it down somewhere. Oh, okay. It's 100 west to 400 west, and 2nd north to 5th north in Heber.
And there are cornerstones on every corner down there, you can see.
Any other questions? Yes.
How did Charleston get its name? We didn't know that one.
I dare to tell you, there's 3 different ideas on how Charleston got its name. One came from the Shelton family, Charles Shelton. If you take the name Charles Shelton, you can get Charles. Now the Shelton, you get the tongue, so you can make Charleston right out of the name. So that's one theory. And then the Decker family, there was a Charles Decker, and that family claims that Charleston was named after Charles Decker. And then the Winterton theory of Charleston, the Wintertons were John and William Winterton. They were herding the cattle there, that would be under Deer Creek Reservoir. And John Parcell and William Winterton were there herding those cattle. And the fellow that carried the mail between Provo and Heber stopped in and said to them, if you can think of is that good? Can you think of a name for this place? And so the Wintertons said, well, how would Charleston be? And so eventually the name Charleston came about. So you got three areas there to choose from. Take your choice.
What a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Anyone else? Yes.
How did Wallsburg get its name?
That was from William Madison Wall. And he was one of the early ranchers there. Lived in Wallsburg for quite a while. And it was called Round Valley at that time. But when he left, it was a few years later, after he had gone from Wallsburg, that the people there named it Wallsburg, after William Madison Wall.
And there's a statue of him on the Heber City Park,
That's right.
on his horse. It's really neat.
And Berg in German is mountain or hill, so Wallsburg, surrounded by the hills, possibly.
I heard a story about when the pioneers came through the valley, that they saw Spaniards packing gold out of the Uintas, and that the Spaniards called it the Valley of Redondo, which meant Round Valley, the Heber Valley, looks like a circle. I told my mother that there's a lot of geothermal activity in Midway and some in Park City. Maybe we're sitting inside a volcanic crater. And she says, well, I hope it blows me to heaven.
Well, it's fascinating because our last presentation was about mining, and gold mining is typically found where there's warmer air temperatures in the tunnels, and so that is where like gold is. And so the only gold mine was from Mayflower, which is on this side, not in Park City. Well, thank you so much for coming. This is such a special treat to hear your stories and share your knowledge with us. Please put your hands together for Alice.